special guest speaker, Mr. Leonidas Wade. Mr. Wade is a local attorney living in Orange Park. He comes to us from a time and era long ago. The year is 1890. About 10 years earlier, he purchased 40 acres of land near Doctor's Lake. Mr. Wade is a well-known attorney in Orange Park and Jacksonville and Green Cove Springs. Shortly after buying the land, Mr. Wade found that Seminole Spring was located on his property. For the last 8 years, Mr. Wade has bottled and sold thousands of bottles of his spring water, and he has made a small fortune since then. He comes to us tonight to tell us about the water he has bottled and his law practice. Please remember that Mr. Wade comes to us from 140 years ago and may not be familiar with people, places, and things that are common to us today. Please help me give a big welcome to our guest speaker, who's going to pronounce his full name, Mr. Wade. And your first name, sir?
The first name is Leonidas, and it's certainly a pleasure to be here with you all this evening. If you'll give me just a moment, we'll get set up and we'll talk a little bit about bottled water. We'll talk a little bit about the law and anything else you want to talk about this evening, okay? As the President said, my name is Leonidas Wade. The year is 1880, 1890, and I have a little law practice up in Orange. Everybody know where Orange Park is? Up the street there? Well, anyway, I was fortunate. I was able to purchase about 40 acres of property several years ago near Doctor's Lake, and as a result of that, I had a fella met out on the property one day, and he said, "Well, Mr. Wade," he said, "can I continue to get water out of your spring?" I said, "Well, yes, sir. Where is my spring?" I'd never seen the property, purchased it sight unseen. Anyway, it was an old black gentleman that lived there. And he explained to me that he had been drinking water out of that spring for the better part of, I don't know, 75 or 80 years at the time. And so he and I got to know each other real well, real quickly. And he was really an interesting character. He was an old farmer that lived there in the Orange Park area. And anyway, he explained to me that the water in the spring he thought was very special. And I said, "Well, what makes it special?" He said, "You know, normally when you drink water out of a spring," he said, "it's just kind of wet." He said, "But your water is bubbly and it just makes you feel good all over." And I thought, well, that's something new, and we'll try some of this. So anyway, as a result of that, got to know him real well. And the next summer, which was 1881, I hired 2 high school kids to come and help me. And we went to Jacksonville. We took this gentleman's wagon up to Jacksonville to an old brewery that had burned down the year before. And we collected bottles out of all the ash and the soot and so forth. I don't know, we probably had 250 of them, put them in the wagon, brought them back to Wadesboro Spring. Now let me stop there for a second. Does anybody know where Wadesboro Spring is? Yes, sir.
Well, it'd be right there close to that Boy Scout camp.
Very good,
what
sir.
we call the Boy Scouts.
Yes, and you would know.
On the Doctor's Lake.
It's also right across the street from what you may know today as an elementary school is there, Montclair Elementary School. And it's now behind a board fence. It belongs to 4 separate property owners, but the spring is still there. Well, anyway, after getting the bottles cleaned up and so forth, we put water in all the bottles, put a cork in them. And see, I had heard that there were people over in St. Augustine selling water. Okay, novel idea, right? Well, anyway, as a result of selling that water in St. Augustine, I also found out you could sell water to the Yankee tourists here in Green Cove Springs. But now let me tell you the difference. Anybody ever tried to drink some of the water out of the spring here at Green Cove? Oh, wait a minute. What are y'all talking about? Well, I'll tell you, it's just as you indicated. You got to hold your nose and you gag when you drink it because it just tastes like rotten eggs, doesn't it? Okay. Well, I want you to compare that with water that I have up at Wadesboro Spring that we bottled. So anyway, make a long story short, we bottled probably 250, 300 bottles that first load and brought them down here to Green Cove Springs to the hotel that was there, a place called the Clarendon. Anybody ever heard of it? It was a big hotel, 200 rooms. I mean, it was usually packed, especially during the latter part of the summer. So anyway, we came down here and I talked to the manager and I asked him if we could sell some water at his hotel. He said, yes, you may, but how much are you gonna pay me? And I thought, okay, well, I'll pay you I'll pay you 50 cents a bottle for the water. So I decided I was gonna sell that water for $2.50 a bottle. Now, I want you to imagine, this is 1881, 1882, and I walk into a hotel and I'm gonna tell this guy that I'm gonna sell water for $2.50 a bottle, and he almost laughed me out of the place. So we came to a deal that I'd give him 50 cents for every bottle I sold. He said, but sir, he said, I don't wanna burst your bubble. He said, but I doubt if you're gonna sell 10 bottles down here. Well, anyway, I went back to where we had the wagon tied up near Governor's Creek. Everybody know where that is?
Yes.
Well, anyway, we brought it on into town, and we set up on the veranda of the hotel. It overlooked the spring, if you know where it is. And make a long story short, in an hour and 15 minutes, I sold 273 bottles of water at $2.50 a bottle. I thought, hey, this is better than I could ever imagine. Well, anyway, I parlayed that for the next year or two, bottling, I should say, picking up bottles, cleaning them up, because in those days there was no deposit, no return. If you bought the bottle, it was out of here. So we'd go back to this old brewery site, pick up bottles, clean them up, put water in them, take them somewhere and sell them. Well, I was so successful here in Green Cove, the following year I went over to St. Augustine. And anyway, everybody laughed at me, but that's all right, I've been laughed at before. So in going to St. Augustine, now listen, I thought it was gonna be easy, but I want you to imagine in 1884, 1885, when we made that first trip over to St. Augustine, how you got to St. Augustine. You'd leave the Orange Park area, and you'd go up an old sandy road to downtown Jacksonville, and then you would take a little steamer across the river to South Side, and once you got over there, then you started figuring out how I'm gonna get to St. Augustine. Well, you know, money talks. And the only thing I had to do was pull a few bills out of my pocket and wave them around, and sure enough, guy comes by and he said, sir, I'll take you to St. Augustine. How much is it gonna cost me? $10 for you and your wagon and you two fellows. I thought, that's pretty good. Well, anyway, we get down to St. Augustine the first time we've been there at the Alcazar Hotel. Anybody know where it is? Yeah, it's downtown St. Augustine. Mr. Flagler created that rather large building. Anyway, once again, went in, met the manager, and told him I wanted to sell some water here. And he too said, well, what are you gonna give me for being able to sell water? And I said, well, look, the guy over in Green Cove charged me 50 cents a bottle. He said, they charge you 50 cents a bottle for selling water? I said, they sure did. I said, that's all right. If 50 cents is good to you, we'll give it a try. He too told me, he said, I doubt if you're gonna sell any water here. And I said, how come? He said, well, you know, there was a guy that came here several hundred years ago by the name of Ponce de Leon. Okay? What was Ponce de Leon looking for? The fountain of youth. And sure enough, he thought it was in St. Augustine. Well, I had drank some of the water out of the spring over at Ponce de Leon's place, and it was just about as bad as the water in Green Cove. Okay? And I thought, man, if I can just get my foot in the door here, we might be able to make some headway with these folks over here in St. Augustine after they were laughing at me. So anyway, we brought the wagon on into town, and later that evening, it was on a Friday night, and they were having some sort of an event out on the veranda at the hotel. And we just kind of walked around with our bottles of water and introduced ourselves. And I'll tell you, in less than an hour, we sold over 290 bottles of water at $2.50 a bottle. So, ladies and gentlemen, I can tell you that took precedence over my law practice. Very much so. And that we went on to sell water for the next 5, 6, almost 7 years up until about 1888, 1889. Now, let me tell you what was here in Green Cove Springs in those days. There was an old building up the street here that was known as the courthouse, and they were talking about building a new courthouse. And the next year, in 1889, this very building that we're in was started with construction. And it was finished in 1890 and finished. As a matter of fact, I have, as a practicing attorney, I didn't know it at the time, but I would try many cases here in this very building because I got tired of making money. I got tired of selling water. Every time we'd go somewhere, somebody wanted to know, well, Mr. Wade, what are you bringing here today? You know, what kind of special water? So I don't have to go through all these stories. So once again, these two boys that I'd hired, they pretty well knew the routine by then of how to sell water. Now, they graduated from high school that year in 1888, 1890, and set them up in business, and they pretty well did a lot of business in Green Cove Springs and across the St. Johns River out there in St. Augustine. Now, a couple of things I found that was very interesting. We're back to Wadesboro Spring I was telling you about. Now that you know where it is, there, Orange Park across from the elementary school and so forth. I was real curious about, because the water that we bottled, and I'm going to show you some in just a second here. The bottle that we bottled, the water that we bottled, we put these old beer and wine bottles that we put together. And then I found out that, you know, what would be a lot better if we could have a bottle that was our very own. So the next summer I ordered about 500 of these blue bottles. And we put our own label on it. And here's what it says. This is the Fountain of Youth Spring Water from St. Augustine, Florida. So my point is this, it didn't matter what was in the bottle, it was what you read on the outside, what you believed, okay? And these two boys that I'd hired within 2 or 3 years, they were millionaires. So they were doing fine with this water business. But once again, I sort of got tired of bottles and water and all that kind of stuff, and I got back into the practice of law, and I did pretty well. As a matter of fact, let me see if I've got a photograph here I'll show you. Once again, I appreciate you all coming out tonight and learning a little bit about bottled water, okay? Somebody told me, said, you'll never sell that stuff. Well, I found out that was not true. You could sell water in about anywhere in Florida as long as it was good water. I'm going to pass this around. This is an actual photograph of me in my law office with my secretary. The building was located right across the street here. And I look a little bit better in those days, but anyway, I'm going to pass this around and just kind of let you look at it. My law practice was very successful. I practiced law for another 25, 28, 29 years. Tried 29 capital cases. I lost how many? 1. Come to find out, in that particular instance, the guy I was representing, he had lied to me and told me some things that were untrue. And make a long story short, the judge found out about it. It was right up here in this courtroom on the 2nd floor. And the judge said, well, Mr. Wade, he said, would you stick around and try this individual and see if you can put him in jail? Now, I want you to imagine, here I'm the prosecuting attorney. Now he turns around within an hour or two and I'm the defense attorney. Now I'm the prosecuting attorney. Well, come to find out, I didn't know it at the time, but that individual had blackmailed the judge over an incident. Now I was beginning to get the picture. Anyway, the judge lets this guy off. He wanted me to go out there and try him and put me up to it. Well, anyway, that was the one case that I lost. The rest of them, we were very successful. I had a good law practice here. I continued to practice law for another 10 years or so, and I died in 1941, and I'm buried right up the street there in Orange Park at Magnolia Cemetery. So if you're ever up that way, I'd like for you to come by and visit and say hello sometime. I feel like my spirit is still there. Let me pause for a minute. Any questions that you may have on bottled water, because I'm an expert coming and going. Can you believe that? Selling water for $2.50 a bottle, and like I say, we sold all we could bottle. I mean, I was amazed. Yes, ma'am.
You said it was bubbly and it didn't have an odor.
No, not at all. Now let me tell you how that worked. About 5 years after I started doing this bottled water and stuff, I found out that I really needed to have some kind of an official analysis of the water. We sent 2 bottles to a laboratory in upstate New York, which did all the water testing on the East Coast. And they sent me back a chemical analysis and told me what all was in it. I mean, everything that's good for you. Now, in reading all the elements that were in there, there were some things I didn't quite understand. Take you back to that old black fella I was telling you about that told me that this water was bubbly and effervescence. Well, let me tell you that this water had a high concentration of radium. Radium. Does that ring a bell or anything?
That'll light you up.
Oh, yes, sir, it would.
Yeah.
Well, anyway, in talking to this fella, he said, this was after I'd known him about 5 years. He said, well, Mr. Wade, he said, I want to show you something, but you'll have to do it in the morning. So I spent the night up at his place, and I said, well, what do you want me to do? He said, well, later this evening, which was a Saturday night, he said, I want you to go down and I want you to put your hands in the spring water, and I want you to run your elbows up to about here. He said, I don't want you to dry them off, but what I want you to do is, after having soaked in the water for about 5 minutes, I want you to lift your arms up. Guess what? I could see the bones in my arm,
Oh.
in both arms. That was the radium that was coming through. Now, we know today that that's something that will kill you.
Yeah.
But for some reason, it was in concentrations in the water that didn't kill you, that made that bubbly feeling in your mouth and so forth. Well, anyway, I guess today I probably wouldn't be able to sell any of that water. Who might have something to say about it? But anyway, I learned more about Wadesboro Spring and the waters that we bottle than you probably ever want to know.
Wade's, B-O-R-O.
Wadesboro, yes ma'am, it sure was. And somebody else had, Art, go ahead.
Question, but was it ever on the menu at any of the high-profile restaurants?
It was only by special request. Now, what I did is later on, around 1892, what I'd do is I'd stock it up, each hotel, and then they would draw off that stock. What really burned me up was the fact that I found out they were selling it for $10 a bottle.
Oh.
Yeah. I mean, we couldn't keep enough water bottled up and sent to the hotel in Green Cove or sent to the hotel over in St. Augustine. Like I say, I learned a lot about, I thought I was good at law, but that was nothing compared to doing this water business.
Sulfur odor?
No odor at all. You couldn't detect any odor, and that's what made it so nice, especially compared with the water down here at the spring here. It smelled like rotten eggs to me. Yes, ma'am.
Do you recall the black gentleman's name, and also, do you know how long he lived?
Yes, he lived to be about 92 years old. He still has family that lives in Orange Park. One of his cousins I saw last year at an event, and that gentleman's probably 85 or 90, and every one of them told me about drinking the water out of Wadesboro. I mean, they were into it. And like I say, I'm not sure what all's in that water, but it's got to be halfway good for you if you can live that long. My goodness. But yes, ma'am. Other questions?
You know
Yes, sir.
his name? You know his name?
His name was Winston. Last name Winston. First name, I think, was Ezekiel. Ezekiel Winston. Lived off of something called Moody Road up there. Question?
Still there?
The spring is still there. I saw it, I don't know, 5, 6 years ago. It's now part of a subdivision called what? The Springs. Half of it's in the town of Orange Park, half of it's over in the county. And the spring run divides the two different subdivisions. And where the spring is located, it's not 150 feet off Doctor's Lake Drive. And it's now in private ownership with 4 different people that own a piece of that spring.
How did it divide the spring?
You got mighty quiet. What's going on here? You been drinking some of my water?
You want to light up.
Other questions? Yes, ma'am. A couple other things about the spring. It was known, I didn't know this until we got into this history business, it was known by several names. Going back to the Spanish era, it was known as the spring that was on the lake, hence Doctor's Lake. And then it was known as Roaring Magnetic Spring. Where do you think that name came from? Well, if you hadn't seen that chemical analysis and knew that it had a chunk of radium in it, you'd have no idea. But once again, I learned a lot from that bottled water business. Question, sure.
Other than water,
Yeah.
when you're ready.
Go ahead.
I was wondering how you came and how you go back. Did you come by the old hard road or the sand road?
Well, that's a good question. No, sir. And as a matter of fact, I don't mean to cut everybody short, but I've got this train coming through here at 9:15, headed back to Jacksonville, and I have got to catch the train because I came in here earlier today on the 4:15 coming from Jacksonville going to Palaca.
Now, otherwise, how
Yes.
would regular people be traveling other than the rain? Other than the
The
train?
rail, there's a little riverboat service that runs up and down the St. Johns River, and there's a captain that lives here in Green Cove Springs by the name of Garner, and he named his boat the May Garner for his young daughter, And Mr. Gardner's always a good place I can spend the night if I'm here in Green Cove. Yes, sir, I can remember that. Got mighty quiet.
I got another one.
Come on. You guys get ready with questions over here. Jerry, I'll get over here next.
Take Jerry's question.
Yes,
then.
okay.
Do you recall where you started to study law in the first place?
Yes, I do. Went to Cumberland. And then came
Maryland?
Cumberland. What I should have told you is I was originally from Quitman, Georgia, over near Valdosta. My dad, he served in the Civil War and died, and my mother was left with 8 children to raise. And I was sort of one of the middle children in there, and I had to learn early on how to make money. And I started out over there, and then actually went to law school. Couldn't make it because I didn't have enough money. And I found out that in Florida, as long as you could read the law and pass the quote bar exam, you were okay. So I started working with 2 attorneys in Jacksonville while I was crating oranges as my primary means of making money, and worked with those 2 gentlemen. And it took me, I failed the first time on the bar, and I passed it the second time, and then I was able to practice for better than about 50 years. But good question. Yes, sir.
In 1907, there was a brand new thing came to Green Cove Springs. It was called electricity.
Yes.
Did you have any encounters with water and electricity together in your time?
Well, I think you learned early on, don't stick your finger in that thing in the wall, like one of these, okay? And make sure you're not standing in water if you want to try something that dumb. Yes, sir, I knew a little bit about electricity. As a matter of fact, that photograph that I'm passing around, if you look close, there's a little bit of a light on one of the walls. Now, let me see if I can show you where this is. You would know this is an electric light that was on the wall, but it didn't work. It was there for show and looks. We had an oil lamp that we actually read by at night. But anyway, I find it very interesting. The table that is in this photograph is right next door in our museum. And I can prove that we actually did practice law based on this photograph that was taken, I think, about 1907, if I'm not mistaken.
When electricity came to Green Cove?
Same year, yeah. Green Cove was 06, 07, somewhere along in there. Can you believe they had electric lights here in Sulphur Gulch? I mean, Green Cove Springs? That early on, but they did. Good question, sir. Now, some of you folks got mighty quiet back here. Let me catch this out.
Yeah, get this other question. I'll keep them coming.
Yes, you were sitting at that table earlier today. Very good, Randy. Yes, ma'am.
What was one of your most interesting court cases?
Most interesting court case probably was a lady that I represented. She had killed her husband, and she had, I think there were 7 witnesses that she had actually killed the guy with an axe. And as a result of that, boy, I just knew. Now listen, I tried those cases upstairs here in this courthouse, in this very courthouse. And one thing that you learned early on, not in law school or in your practice, but you learned how to read a jury. In representing this young lady, we came in and opening remarks and so forth, and I could tell the jury was just about going to kill her, regardless of what I had to say. So anyway, that trial lasted about 2 days, and it came down to the closing arguments. To make a long story short, I had if you'd stand up, ma'am, I had the lady do this. I said, turn around this way. I said, now lift up your arms, and I want you to show the members of the jury your hands. Okay? Do you think this lady could pick up an axe and kill a man?
No.
No. And anyway, as a result of that and a few other arguments, we were able to get her off. She was found not guilty. I had some very interesting cases. I really won't go into at this point, but yes, ma'am. Yes, sir. There were some of those cases I can remember very, very good. Other questions, sir?
Let's stay on the court cases.
Let's go.
Would there by chance a young man by the name of Roy S. Geiger you would have known? He practiced law?
Yes, as a matter of fact, I was looking for a photograph of General Geiger. What this gentleman is bringing out, there was the Giger or Geiger family has been around here in Clay County since it was created, probably even long before that when we were part of Duval County. There was a Giger family that lived out in Middleburg, and they had a little boy named Roy. And Roy, he was a real entrepreneur. He started off at about 10 years old on his bicycle delivering telegraph messages there in Middleburg. Now, it's hard for me to understand how you could ride a bicycle in Middleburg, but he did.
He did a lot of running.
He sure did. But as a result of that, he was saved up enough money, he actually went to Stetson University and became a teacher. And he decided early on that he didn't particularly want to put up with the kids. Does that sound familiar, teachers? Okay. So he decided he wanted to do something else. Anybody want to guess what he did? He joined the Marine Corps. And he was quite a fella. And I'll tell you, if you'd known General Geiger, he was the kind of guy you could talk with for hours and hours. Anyway, he went on to all kinds of different places around the world. During World War I, he commanded the Marine Aviation Unit over in France. Did very well and continued his aviation career. And as the Second World War began, he was, I think he was only a brigadier general, one star at that point in time, but he was assigned to the Pacific Fleet on the admiral staff. And it wasn't very long that this little old boy from Middleburg that's now made brigadier general, he's put in charge of all Marines in the Pacific. And he conducted the majority of the amphibious operations during the Second World War in the Pacific. And he was almost brilliant with amphibious operations, because remember, that was something new. They didn't know too much about it. But old General Roy Geiger, he remembered his days swimming in Black Creek, as he said, and diving around and so forth. So he knew a little bit about water and things like that. But good question. Other questions? Come on, I'm gonna wake everybody up. Yes, sir.
Where was your office in that table located at?
Well, right across the street here, the building is gone now. There were several little block buildings, concrete block buildings, if you would, out of old foreign blocks. And my office was right across the street from here. And that's where this particular picture was taken, many, many years. All those buildings are gone now. Yes, sir.
Since you eventually married your secretary,
Wait a minute now. Who in the world told you
I
that?
shouldn't have said it that way. Were there any children?
Excuse me, he's right. He's correct. But go ahead.
Yes, were there any children as a result?
Yes, there were. There were two. When I came to Green Cove Springs, I was married to a lady that I had known that I grew up with in Equipment, Georgia, and she was my secretary. And she was difficult to work with. She was always on my case about something. Well, anyway, it wasn't several years later that we divorced, and somehow I ended up marrying my new secretary. And we were married 34 years. That's a little bit of history that only Jerry would come up with. He's an old Middleburg boy. He knows how to ask those questions too. That was a good one. I had almost forgot about that. Other questions? Comments? Well, once again, I know the train whistle is going to be blowing in a few minutes, and I think I better go out there and at least get ready to go. You've been a good audience tonight, and I hope to see each one of you. Come back and visit with museums with us sometime. Thank you.
Thank you.